This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Welcome, everyone, to the Outpost RBA podcast. I am Will Robus, and with me, as always, is Stuart McIntosh. Stuart, how are you doing today?
Good. Ready for a question day. I like these.
Ready for another question day. That's right. It's another SOC therapy session with Dr. Stu, collecting all of your deepest, darkest secret questions, or perhaps questions you've asked hundreds of times, but no one's giving you a good answer for. So we will try to remedy that in this episode. But before we get started, as always, we got some housekeeping and mostly just some ways that you can get involved with the broader community, as well as hopefully a lot of listeners of this podcast. The first connection point that we talk about every week is the RBA Community. And you can find that website at rba.community. It is a very active group. We're adding new members every week. I think we're probably pushing almost 800 members. Again, it's focused around the subject of risk-based alerting. It's a lot of people that work in Splunk, but it's really broadly more focused on security practitioners, defensive security professionals. We've got people from large companies, from small companies, from public sector, as well as Splunkers and Splunk partners. It is really grown to be, and the cool part is that it's really the place where RBA and enterprise security and, architects and threat detection people really hang out. And I think we've got almost all of the RBA experts represented and tuned in on a daily or weekly basis. So some of the questions today we pull from actually that Slack group. So check out RBA.community, look at joining the Slack group, and that is your kind of real-time heart pumping of everything we've got going on within kind of the closer and the broader group.
We also have now recordings from prior meetings. We also have some of the workshop recordings on there that you can register and view as well. So yeah, it's always growing in content.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is a perfect segue into kind of the second connection point, are numerous events that get hosted monthly and broadcast through that RBA.community. So as Stuart just mentioned, we've got some recordings of past events and workshops. Did data model mechanic, say that 3 times fast, workshop a couple months ago. I think last month there was an assets and identities workshop. So kind of key foundational building points to rolling out RBA in your environment. So those are kind of the focused events, and those we try to do, I think, a workshop quarterly. But monthly we have kind of more general meetups, really meant for people to get initially connected, help people get started with risk-based learning in their programs, connecting them with other members of the group. We try to tell some stories of success as well as not so success and lessons learned. So we hope the goal is to try to have people not try to reinvent the wheel every time, and take some best practices from those that have come before them. And then we have a little we used to have kind of a specific office hours session with Q&A, but I think we folded that into kind of the monthly meetup. So it's a great kind of low bar way to get plugged in, get conversations going, and to connect with people, especially as you get started. So finally, got Splunks.conf coming up as of this recording. I think it's about 6 weeks away. We will be out there hosting a live and in-person meetup on that Monday, just before Splunk CEO gives his keynote. So if you're coming out to .conf, check out the RBA community site. and you'll find information on that meetup. You can RSVP for that. But if you are out in Vegas for Splunk's big user group conference this year, drop us a note, let us know, try to get to the meetup. But we'd love to see you in real life. So that brings us to our topic of the day. And as I mentioned before, this is our kind of second installment of what we've affectionately called Blueline with Dr. Stu. We mentioned kind of in the previous episode what our intention was and what our motivation was for putting together Q&A episodes. There are a lot of technical discussions that go on in the Slack channel, in the meetups. Like I mentioned, we've got workshops that do sort of technical deep dives on different subject areas, especially inside of Splunk Enterprise Security. But we also get into a lot of discussion, especially in kind of like smaller groups or one-on-ones with companies that we work with. There's a lot of maybe kind of gray area questions or strategic leadership, culture, change management type of challenges that we run into, especially when we're trying to either build out a program or maybe redirect it or kind of change the way things have always been done. So that's really our kind of ideas and motivations around these kind of Q&A episodes, to try to dig a little deeper without putting people on the spot, or maybe some questions that people like to ask but don't always maybe have the time or courage to speak up about it.
Peeling apart the "it depends" answers.
Yeah. So with that, we get questions from the community. We've kind of cherry picked questions from our, like I said, small group or one-on-one interactions with customers and companies that we work with. Today, we've got a selection of questions with common thread or theme is integration, which is probably the quintessential question that gets answered with "it depends."
Yeah, absolutely. It depends. So I'm excited to see if that's how we end up answering these. It depends. Yeah. We'll give it a shot.
Well, and I think actually most of the topics are all platform dependent as well. So there are dependencies that go into all of these realities, trying to go down the road of these different approaches, whether it be strategically or technically. So, all right. Well, with that, our first question is around the ever popular SOAR topic. And we have a question from Soaring in Seattle. And they ask, we wanted to improve our SOAR playbooks before we do RBA. Is there anything we should know?
It depends. There we go. 30 seconds in. This is not a lot to go off of here, but we'll take a couple cracks at this. I think something important. They have a security automation tool, which is good. It may be the Splunk one, since that's what they call SOAR. It could be something else. What do we know about out there? There's Palo Alto XOR. We know about Splunk SOAR. Then you have some like Revelstoke and other different ones. So we're going to answer this kind of broadly about what SOAR, and maybe more from the Splunk playbook perspective. But you could kind of translate this to other things. So we know they have that tool, and we know they're not currently doing RBA, but they want to do it. Sounds good. One of the struggles we see going into this is if you come from a place where you're automating these one-to-one alerts or traditional ones, sometimes these playbooks have to account for everything, right? That like for every alert, there tends to be an automation playbook that was developed. So if you have 50 alerts, you probably have 50 playbooks. And that, right? Like that's just a lot. That's a lot of things to make sure it works all the time. We don't know if they're always firing or not. Just a lot of operational maintenance there. What should they know? The biggest thing that we've seen is RBA alerts are more complicated, right? So instead of, hey, this is a suspicious email, trigger the suspicious email playbook, now it's, here's an alert for a user. It could be email, it could be a download from the web, it could be maybe some data transfer stuff related to them. And so whenever you're looking to automate RBA alerts, it's really all about kind of maybe reducing it from the alert perspective, the complexity, and focusing on what is our decision making and response steps. So what would I do if a user's account was compromised, period? Or what do I do if a workstation was compromised? How would I investigate it and how would I respond to it? And so it's just a different thought process when you come to building these playbooks. A really helpful place to start, Splunk actually released a risk-based alerting or RBA playbook content pack for their platform. And I like it because a big contributor behind that was Kelby Shelton, who actually helped put RBA in at his former customer that he had worked at. And he helped develop some of these playbooks knowing some of this RBA fundamental work. So that's a really good kind of place to start with. How would I approach some of these? But I think the really important thing is reduce how many of those streams, those work streams you have, and get a little bit more specific about how do I handle a user? How do I handle a system? Like really clean up those stacks. I don't know, from the outside, what do you think, Will? You've been in on some of these conversations.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to pick apart that you mentioned. Not pick apart, but unpack. So the RBA alerts being, I mean, complicated.
Dense?
Yeah, they're more dense, but the way you just described it, it made me think of they really, because you're presenting an alert based on a user or system or other type of object, it's really a new context.
Yeah.
And so and that kind of rolls into the second piece I wanted to pick apart was we see most of the SOAR implementations attempting to really beat down the noise, right? It's trying to create these reflexes for, high probability, whatever it is, right? I mean, a lot of high probability false positives are just getting beat down by SOAR. And that's kind of been what we've seen traditionally as a driver, is to let's reduce the volume with this automation piece, which when you have an alert with all of this, with a new context, and as well as all of this automatic enrichment. So it's a new context with a whole bunch more context that you've never had before. I think that's what really lets you even start to think about automation from a decision-making process. So those were kind of the keywords I pulled out on how you describe that. And it's really it's a complete strategy shift almost.
Yeah. And I kind of like that you're pulling that out, because prior to RBA, a lot of the use of SOAR tools was a coffee filter, where each subsequent action in a playbook was a finer filter to drop more stuff. How do I take some of this overhead out to get to something that's real? But when RBA is involved, it's already doing that on the front end. So you don't need your automation to do that. Now you need your automation to look at decisions and actions. And so, yeah, you're right. We didn't have to use that muscle or that ability prior because we were so inundated with just noise and weight of filtering. Now you're going to look at SOAR for a real SOAR purpose, as opposed to this kind of giant filter to pass everything through to mimic the first 30 seconds. Like what's funny is a lot of SOAR stuff is literally just kind of mimicking the first 30 to 60 seconds of a human. Does this matter? Yes or no? Now you're getting to a point where all that's done before an alert arrives. So now an alert arrives. Now you're in the back end of what is a human doing. Well, they're looking at context, they're looking at indicators, and they're making decisions, and then they're taking steps. So that's what you're now trying to look at. And so I think it's very important to kind of know that the same way we change detection strategies, you should probably account for it in automation strategies as well. You should be open to the fact that there is a shift here in the way you approach it. Yeah, and it depends.
Yeah. Well, in the RBA architecture, that's one of its design principles, is that it's able to absorb all that noise and really distill signal from it. So, I mean, I guess back to the question, if they want to implement playbooks or improve playbooks, focus less on the noise filtering and the reflexive, or the fire hose stuff, the playbooks that are meant to reduce the fire hose, and really focus on maybe a couple or a handful that would be potential templates for decision-making automation.
Yeah. And I think anything that's triggering those fire hose ones, those should be on your detection priority list then. If you're filtering 95% out with automation, hey, that's a really good candidate for moving that detection into RBA. But then back to what you're saying, which is instead of the really highly active ones, look for the ones that maybe are rooted in decision-making and response as good templates for continuing with RBA. Yep.
Yeah. And the SOAR, we see SOAR being a priority in a lot of places. We get questions about, how it relates to RBA, a little more broad than this particular question. But we typically coach teams to, hey, maybe hit the pause button on SOAR, build out your RBA functionality, or at least, pick one or two use cases in RBA that you want to focus on initially as a proof of concept or kind of an end-to-end demonstration. And then you'll have a better feeling or idea of what the source priority should be after that, because you're just getting better information, you're getting more signal. So if you had to do one before the other, we definitely recommend do RBA first, and then maybe start attacking SOAR, because you're just going to have a totally different viewpoint, and we believe you're going to be much, much more effective with that time and effort spent on the next gen playbooks in SOAR.
Exactly.
All right. So we'll go on to the next question. And this one is one we hear a lot or see a lot in environments. And it is related to integrating enterprise security and ServiceNow. So Snowing in San Diego asks, I'm sending our alerts from ES to ServiceNow so our analysts can work the tickets. We are struggling with how to make this effective with RBA alerts for the analysts. How can we make this better for them?
Yeah, ServiceNow, aka Snow. For anyone that's actually touched it, they'll know that in all the logs and all the documentation, they just call it Snow. Yeah, we get this a lot. So, and here, so we get it a lot for ServiceNow. A new one that's kind of evolving. We've been seeing a couple customers using Jira for ticket. Like essentially, it opens tickets in Jira. They're all kind of the same, and they're all taking this ticket management approach. which I would like to roll back into something called case management. So just when there's an alert, how do we manage the life cycle of that case? So I'm going to start calling it case management because alert can be a lot of things to a lot of people. So traditionally, enterprise security has not had a customizable or intuitive case management feature. So specifically, it's been incident review is their main dashboard for this. It's where they get notables, which are actionable, like an analyst or automation should be looking at it. They have been making improvements to it. But at the end of the day, a lot of people weren't waiting around, and they either get the two driving forces that we've seen for people doing case management outside of enterprise security has been metrics. Like, I want these out of the box metrics. And the other one has been consistent ticket handling in an organization. So we use ServiceNow for our help desk. We would like the security help desk, the SOC, to also use it for case management. And that's also where the metrics kind of come from, which is we want to look at call volume, call time, resolution status. And anyone who's had to work one of these cases in ServiceNow understands that there can be almost an infinite loop of drop downs. And it won't tell you which drop downs are required until you try to save an update to the ticket. And then it's like, oh, you forgot these 17 other drop downs. I just wanted to add a note. So
Shit, sounds like it belongs in the UI Hall of Shame.
I think the ServiceNow UI people came from Salesforce. That's just, it's a completely unfounded rumor, but it's just a guess because they inspire the same emotional feeling from me every time I use both. So anyway, but that customization is what some of these groups are used to, right? Like, I can change which fields are mandatory. I can change what's in the drop down. Traditionally, enterprise security hasn't really allowed this. It's like you get a comment field and you get a drop down that says what status is it. Recently, they introduced, or not recently, probably a year and a half ago, they introduced an idea of disposition. And I really like this because we can use status to say, where in the workflow is this case? Has it been picked up? Is an analyst working it? Are we waiting on an outside entity to hear back from like the end user or an admin of that system? Or is it closed? So we can understand where, like, what state is this case in? And then disposition is really great because now we can say, well, it's closed, but it was closed benign or closed malicious. And so we can use now these two customizations to look at fidelity as well as duration. Like, oh, we're always waiting for the desktop team to get back to us. Okay, that's causing these cases to be long. So that can help. And I don't like things that are unlimited configurations. Like, oh, you can customize it all you want, because I think people focus on the customization rather than efficacy, rather than using it and streamlining it. When you only have 3 things to customize, you're going to make it as efficient as possible. So I do kind of like that. And we've seen groups actually leave ServiceNow and come back to incident review after we've worked with them to get them into these kind of smoother transitions, easier case management. The other thing that is metrics, and we end up having to develop and drop in metrics dashboards with almost every engagement we do, because especially for this case management side, it's not usually answering questions that leaders have. So that's if you're sticking, if you want to come back home to enterprise security, that's what I would look at doing. If you would like to make your ServiceNow integration better for an analyst, like, okay, we're going to stick with this. How do we make it better? Like, we can't go back. This is what we're doing. How do we make it better? Couple things. One, synchronize your notes and status changes back to enterprise security. There is an API call that Splunk supports for updating notables. 100% synchronize that back, because that'll let your detection engineers see what's going on with fidelity, because they really need that feedback. It can't just leave and they have no idea what's going on with case status. They need to know at least how are these being closed so that we can look at detections. So sync that back. The other thing is provide a link to whatever your investigative dashboard is. So we use a dashboard called Risk Object Detail. Provide a link directly in the case notes. So when you send the notable to ServiceNow to create a case, include that URL so that an analyst can quickly pull up that specific dashboard already populated with that risk object. It's the number one downfall I've seen. They are going to have to transition. You'll never get enough details into a ServiceNow case for an analyst to only do work in ServiceNow. It's just not possible. So if they have to come back to another platform, smooth that transition, make it clickable for them. So those are kind of the two big ones that that we've been a part of for trying to help smooth that out. Jira, not as much hands-on, but again, that API update for notables is available. We've seen customers customize that either through automation or through hooking it into other tools. So that's available. And that link, it's just a link. So you can include that even in Jira as well.
Yeah. So it's a two-way sync, really, or at least it's a, well, pivot maybe, but we need the statuses and the closures from the ticketing platform, because that, you said that's an important piece of information for kind of postmortem or the tuning, really to get that boots on the ground data.
It's a feedback loop. Otherwise, we have no analyst feedback.
Yeah.
And that's the whole goal of this, is how do we include a feedback loop in detection and response? Well, if you don't have the analyst feedback that's somewhere else, we don't have a loop. It's just literally
it's broken. It's broken. And then the second piece is because, I mean, there's only so much information that you can present in the ticketing platforms, whatever it is. So bring the analyst back to where all of the data is, all of the enrichment, it's presented consistently, bring them back to do their analysis where all that data lives. And again, like, one of the things that RBA does really well is get rid of this death by 1,000 portals piece by bringing all of that decision-making information presented on one screen. So yeah, you don't want them to lose that viewpoint. So, and then I suppose, so as of this recording, I think Mission Control in Splunk has GA'd for maybe a couple months, 2 or 3. You're
going there. I wasn't going to go there, but you're going.
Well, I mean, it's something to know about. It's something that we haven't had a lot of hands-on experience with. It's definitely been in the Splunk pipeline for a long time. So it's been under development for a while. But
and it's their attempt to really go after case management better. It really is the response to, if incident review isn't good at case management, what should be good at it? And it's their attempt to answer that question. Yep. So it is a much more modern take on it than incident review. Yeah.
Yeah. But the kind of the first principles remain key, right? Is how do you capture that disposition or that closure status? And then how do you make sure that the analyst has access to that enriched presentation of the security events, and all of that context that helps make correct decisions quickly.
And that's the piece I'll say, especially if you're sticking with ServiceNow, really talk to the analysts about how much effort it takes to capture their feedback. because that's the thing I love about incident review. It's super easy to capture feedback because there's only a couple things they can do. And so it's like click, click, type, save. So it's super easy and it's very clean. But in ServiceNow, there's tabs within tabs. There's drop downs that are fed off other drop downs. It can be a lot. So if you're sticking with ServiceNow, really refine, how do I efficiently capture it from an analyst what their thinking is so that I can use it later on? But also, how do I not burden them with unnecessary things? Because I see these like nested, like, oh, we picked malware. Well, what kind of malware? What do you mean, what kind of malware? And it's like, well, is it Windows or Linux malware? Okay, it's Windows. Well, what kind of Windows malware? Excuse me? Like, I don't know. Like, just let me close the ticket that it was malicious. And it's this over classification that can become a huge burden to analysts. And what I've noticed, guess what those analysts know? What answer do I give requires the fewest amount of clicks? Not the most accurate, the one that gets me out of this as fast as possible. And that I if you were to pull those metrics today, I bet right now your top 2 closure statuses, if you're using ServiceNow for security, are probably the least amount of effort for an analyst to do.
Well, and
because that they have to do it all day.
Right. And the intention of all those drop downs and fields, I would guarantee come from someone trying to build out a report or a dashboard that goes up to leadership
Somewhere.
or analysis. So you defeated your own purpose and you're not collecting good information because it's too much work. So, all right. Third question, threat intelligence. So,
integration day.
Threat intelligence is what we see is it's typically underutilized. And it's not intentionally, but it's kind of goes back to the first comment of SOAR. It can be really, really noisy. And then kind of we see this automatic flooding of alerts and false positives. And I feel like a handful of places we've seen them turn it off as soon as they turn it on.
It's definitely a collision of 2 large data sets. And whenever they collide, people try to turn it off. Then they scratch their head and say, how do we turn this back on? Then it collides. Then they turn it back off. So how can we? What are they wondering about?
Well, I think exactly
obvious.
Exactly that. Exactly that. The question is, we have purchased a threat intel service, but the results are overwhelming for our SOC. We think RBA would be great for this, but how do we implement it? And that comes from Tipping in Topeka.
Yeah. So setting stage, when we say threat intel, there might be a threat intel team in the security organization. What we generally run into is similar to this question, which is think of threat intel as a technical capability or a feed, like a threat intel feed. So we see some from ISACA groups. So if you belong to one of those, like FSISAC, we see them for like open source ones. So Spamhaus, Abuse IPDB, SANS, and then we also see premium ones. So Splunk has a tip, was the acquisition of TrueStar. We see Recorded Future, Domain Tools, Anomaly. Anomaly's product is ThreatStream. But in essence, they are collections of IOCs, indicators. Let's, for example, just stick to IPs. This is a known malicious IP. So this feed might have a bunch of them. And the goal is to spot whenever that IP is found in your logs. Admirable goal. Sounds like a great detection. What tends to happen when people turn, because it's just turn it on, right? Just enable it. what tends to happen is this flooding, for a couple of reasons. One, no one's actually analyzed this data before to put in prevention. So if you've never really blocked malicious IPs, you might have a lot of them that are hitting you. Two, these types of detections don't lend well to direct alerts, because it's like, hey, this is known as a malicious IP and it touched a computer on your environment. Well, an analyst doesn't really know what to do with that. Again, back to, they're lacking a lot of context. They're lacking, well, what did it do? And so it's like, it's not a false flag, but it's such a generic, there's something wrong in the world flag, that they don't even know how to be effective at it. It's like, somewhere someone is sick. Oh, okay. What would you like me to do with this information? Well, find the sick person. I think I'm just going to close this. And that's what happens. They just close until they get really tired of hitting close and they tell them to turn it off. And a big pressure, not only is there pressure to do threat intel matching in environments because of the technology or a purchase, like, hey, we invested money in a premium feed, we would like to get value out of it. There also tends to be compliance pressure. So CMMC for any of the defense industrial base, there's a straight requirement that says, are you leveraging threat intel for alerting in your environment? Yes or no? And so there's these regulatory pressures to enable this as well. So we have to solve this. And I'm glad they're kind of riding on the RBA effect, because what RBA does is it combines this threat intel match, let's call it a content match, with something else that's going on. So we can say, hey, it's a malicious IP that reached out to this IP. Hey, we also saw it triggering these network alerts as well. Or we saw something from our EDR tool to that same IP. This is kind of weird. So now instead of saying, hey, someone's sick in the world, now we can say, hey, this alert over here for EDR, it might be more significant because we also have this threat intel indicator. And so now we can start correlating what's going on across these different feeds. And so RBA, like from what we've done, it's tremendous value in augmenting RBA, the threat intel feeds are. And the best part is, especially with Splunk Enterprise Security, we can mix and match threat intel feeds. So we can actually do all of them. We can do SANS, abuse IP, and one of these premium feeds like TrueStar. We can let it run across all of our logs with data models efficiently. And we could churn out all those results in RBA and let the matching begin with other detections. So RBA, I think personally, RBA is perfect for this. It opens the door for leveraging these feeds that a lot of people either have already made a financial investment into or made just kind of a time investment into. Only other caveat to that, especially if you have a premium threat intel feed, learn to leverage them for blocking as well as some of this alerting. So create kind of a tight list and publish it to your firewalls, publish it to your AWS security controls, that when we put an IP on this list, it's blocked across our entire environment immediately. This also works great with operating companies. So if we work for the parent company, we've done the investigative work to say, hey, this is bad, push that threat intel feed for blocking across even your operating companies. It's great. It streamlines response. It's super efficient. And it's a way that works with the network team of saying, we will only put blocks out through this list. And so if you're ever in question about what we did, check the list. Like, so it's a really great kind of middle ground to negotiate with the network team as well. Otherwise, you're waiting on tickets probably from ServiceNow, that you wrote to the network team and for them to deploy a block. And they don't want to, like, it's the middle of the night. Like, you get what you get sometimes.
Yeah.
So it can really up your game on both sides.
Yeah. So let me try to, because I think that was a lot. And
sorry.
That's
I love
okay.
This one.
But it's end to end. And so I want to kind of summarize, or at least like break it down into steps. So the question was, how do we use RBA to implement threat intel? And number one is it's great for it. It's designed for it. Okay. But the second, or the way to do it is add those threat intel matches to risk.
Correct.
So it's going to
small risk score values too.
Yep.
Small.
So it's going to correlate with not only, okay, so it's a known threat from the feed, which sometimes those are not always accurate either. Correct. It's an opinion.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a higher probability threat from an IP address standpoint. You fold it into risk. So you correlate it with existing events that have elevated risk or are of interest or anomalies. So you're boosting kind of that signal by this triangulation piece. And then when someone's reviewed it and said, yeah, this is a malicious,
it's legit, this is bad,
malicious IP, and we can see evidence of it trying to cause havoc in a part of our network, then let's promote that to being blocked as a policy across everywhere. Right. So it's creating a super powerful, super efficient feedback loop, and it's all that is boosted by these free or premium feeds with a lot of data that's coming at you pretty fast.
And the premium ones, you can also include in that risk event, you can include what's their analysis detail. It's a part of a botnet, or this one's known to be a part of an APT group or a beacon or a command and control server. So you can, when it goes to write that risk event, you can bring all of that analysis in, saving an analyst from having to look all this up or say, why do I care? Right? How do I decide if it's kind of an iffy threat intel match or a legit? That analyst research really helps when it's in there. The other piece, so each thing you laid out, I think are great methodical steps in that order for onboarding threat intel into a security practice for detection and response. The one I've run into the most pushback with is blocking IPs. I have come across security organizations that say, we don't worry about blocking IPs. It's stupid. It's a waste of time. It's easy, right? It's low table stakes for an attacker to change their IP. Fair. But when your response time is in minutes, as opposed to opening a ticket, having to fill all of those drop downs in the case, sending it to another human being who has to open another portal and put it in a list. If that's your approach to blocking, I agree with you. That's a lot of cost to block an IP that can be rotated. But when you can put it in the hands of an analyst to add it to a list and it just goes everywhere, you've lowered that cost so significantly that from a cost standpoint, you're not right. It's worth it from a cost. Now, how does that help your network? It takes pressure off of other security layers. And I have seen this time and again play out. If you ignore the little ankle biters and you're not putting a block on those, then all of a sudden you have this avalanche or this, like, where the ground shifts, and all of a sudden it's a big problem. And it's because we just kind of ignored early signs. I mean, we've talked about before, we've had customers that have identified malicious IPs faster than their threat intel feeds. And what did they do? They blocked it. They blocked it before even the threat intel providers were releasing it. They didn't have to worry when it hit the news. They already knew a block was deployed. And so it saves you time in the future that is unquantifiable now. But it's worth it if you can lower the expense of doing it.
Yeah, and it's a why not almost. But remember, like if RBA gives you this heightened sense of sensitivity, so you can see these little chip shots early, and you can kind of see them reoccur, right?
Yep.
Over a shorter period of time, and because they're all correlated. So you're basically just taking, hey, we've made an observation here in one part of the network or in the environment. We're just going to proliferate this all over everywhere, so that they don't even have a chance to take a chip shot here, because we know that it's not good. So it's more of a distribution of information than a pure defense.
And swift action. Once we make a decision, how swiftly can we capitalize on that decision? Because by them deploying a block right then, guess what? Tomorrow or later that day, an analyst is not going to have to deal with that alert. It's not going to come back. So this is where it even helps with these reoccurring alerts, because you took that pressure off the system. So that's where and here, now we're getting into some of the value props of executing response on RBA alerts, which on RBA alerts is try not to get the same alert twice, right? How do we make a more durable response action? So, but yeah, I think threat intel, the RBA is a match made in heaven with threat intel feeds, not only using it to augment what you see, but also for enforcing what you decide. 100%.
All right.
So I hope that helps tipping in Topeka. I hope you're on the right path. Stick to it and make it a risk rule.
All right. So that's the questions we have for today around integration. We covered implementing integration. We covered some ground from SOAR to from SOAR to case management to threat intel.
Did you just make a new tool? Snore?
What's it stand
for? I think you made a new tool. I don't know. We'll have to come up with that, but look for it. Snore, brought to you by Outpost.
I feel like it's something that should be presented to the board. All right. So with that, please do not be afraid to submit us your questions. We promise we will only start the answer with "it depends," but we will do our best to drill down and hopefully give you some direction. So you can Slack us questions and DMs. You can check us on our website, outpost-security.com. We are active on LinkedIn, of course, so lots of different ways to connect with us. Send us your questions. As always, we appreciate you tuning in. We're happy to have this opportunity to share with you. We're still working on kind of the official release schedule, but we're hoping to do at least a couple episodes a month. So with that, we look forward to having you tune in next time. We appreciate you listening. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn and contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.